Are there any potential trades in the NFL draft coming up that could make sense? We're going to talk about that. Plus, with the combine a little over a week away, the RAS King himself, Kent Lee Platte, is going to join us to break it all down. Coming up next on the Draft Countdown Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Draft Countdown Podcast. I'm your co-host, Brian Bosars, joined as always by my co-host, Shane P. Hallam. Shane, 63 days, 22 hours, 58 minutes, 40 seconds away from the 2024 NFL Draft.
We are fastly approaching the combine, so I'm excited to have Kent Lee Platte on the show tonight, as we do every year. So I'm excited to talk that, and there's definitely been some draft buzzes growing. It's continuing to grow out there.
Yep. So those joining us tonight for the first time, if you're listening or watching live on YouTube, pop a question in the chat. We'll answer it at the end of the show. Or if you're following on Twitter, send a question to @DraftCountdown. We'll answer it from there. Or if you're a member of our Discord, you can ask a question there always, and we'll answer it on the show. And if you're not a member of our Discord, please go to DraftCountdown.com. In the top right corner of the search bar, there's a link to join the Discord there. Shane, you're a little under weather tonight, so I figured I'd give advance warning to the folk watching and listening. My man got the sniffles.
Yeah, look, it's when you have a 6-month-old in the house, and I teach 100 plus high school kids a day. It's just a constant illness train going. So hopefully I mute myself enough with the sniffling here.
We'll be all right. Saw an interesting note earlier this week. The Saints got some good news, right? Instead of $87 million over the cap, they're now only going to be like $80 million over the cap, as the salary cap was projected to be $243 million. Now they're expecting it to be just over $250 million. So good news, right?
Yeah, like I think it's always good when the cap goes up, get more money to players. Good for the teams, I think, to be able to expand and restructure some deals and still get under, right? I think that's when we have some fun. When teams really are way over and have to cut and almost forced to rebuild, it sucks for those fan bases. So, but I'm always down for the salary cap going up.
Yeah, that's no fun at all. I mean, helps the Bengals, right? Because they're going to have a franchise tag they're going to have to pay out here. So that'll help that out a little bit.
Exactly. All these quarterbacks getting paid. You want as much as you can get.
Right. All right, Shane, before Kent comes on, had a little fun with the piece I wrote yesterday about some potential trades in the first round that made sense to me. I want to kind of get your take on a couple of them. One that I saw before Chad Reuter from NFL.com put out his mock draft and projected this very trade. I had been toying with my head. I was like, because I kept thinking back to last year's draft where the Texans drafted C.J. Stroud at number 2, but traded back up from 9 to 3 to draft Will Anderson. And I got to thinking, I mean, New England, they're going to want a lot of, picks, right? They need a quarterback and stuff like that. What's stopping the Bears after drafting Caleb Williams at 1 from coming back up from 9 to 3 to New England? New England maybe acquires Justin Fields in the move to come up, and they do maybe some pick swaps later on or something like that. Maybe an extra day 3 pick or day 2 pick, something like that. Is that something that you could A, see happening, or B, does it make sense to do something like that?
I think it's interesting. I think if you're the Patriots and you're in a position to take, a quarterback, if you have all the top 3 graded, maybe top 4 graded as top 10 picks, like, it seems like, do you really want to be trading for Justin Fields, paying him a ton of money to move back to 9 and maybe not get an elite player? Like you said, it would take some pick swaps later. I think that's too costly for Justin Fields, to be honest with you, with what he's put on film and on the table so far. I think we're looking more to second round pick. If I'm the Patriots, I'd rather trade the second round pick for him and keep 3 and take Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Like, that would be the better move, I think, than making this type of swap, unless they're getting something else in return.
Well, I mean, they would keep 9. I mean, they would get 9 back in the trade.
Right. But I mean, we saw 9-3 last year cost a future first round selection. That's Justin Fields is not worth that. So the Patriots would need something else. In addition, if I was them, here's a second round pick and a third round pick next year for Fields. Let me keep 3 and draft Marvin Harrison, right? I think that would be a better approach. But I still think we're looking at teams further down the draft order for Fields than the Patriots. You're going to want to handpick your guy and not be saddled with a bigger contract for that player, right? I mean, rookie deals are the window. It's kind of the window now. Outside of like Brady and Mahomes, I mean, that's the window, and Brady took a lot less money. So I think it'd be hard pressed if I have a QB graded high enough to take it 3 to make that move. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. It seems like Fields is going somewhere. So
let's just hypothetically say that deal does get made, and Chicago takes Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3. Arizona stands to gain greatly again this year, right, in a move back, because now that third quarterback is sitting there for the Giants, the Falcons, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, the Saints. I mean, a number of teams poised to move up to 4 then, right?
Yeah, that would be ideal for the Cardinals, because then, all right, Harrison's not there. Maybe you feel like Malik Neighbors is worth 4, but even so, the like you said, the package you could get for someone to move up for potentially bottom tier of quarterback, or, even if you think JJ McCarthy's in that top tier, is still attractive, because none of those teams you named, Brian, are going to get a quarterback where they're picking.
No.
That wouldn't happen anymore. So, I think Arizona, that's the dream, is that the quarterbacks don't go 1, 2, 3.
I mentioned a couple other spots like later on. I'm firmly convinced at this point, by the way, that Chicago and Washington are staying put. I don't think they're moving off of 1 or 2. I think we're going to see those 2 stay.
I don't know how. I mean, we could talk Chicago all day, but Washington feels locked in. I mean, with what happened with Sam Howell at the end of the season, you got to take a quarterback there.
I mean, I mentioned Denver. They don't have a lot of ammo. Like, I think they only have 6 total picks. They don't have a second round pick. Their draft capital situation is rough for them to move up. The Saints also don't have a third round pick. They have a second round pick. It's Denver's. So I mean, right. They don't have their own second round pick, but like we speak on this show a lot, Mickey Loomis is a crazy man. So
who knows?
Who knows what he'll do? I'm not unconvinced Les Snead doesn't get bored and starts trading somewhere, either up or down. I don't know. The man F them picks, man. He don't care.
Yeah, look, it's time to go back to the picks, and I think he knows that that's the saving grace here. Is you had your window, you won your Super Bowl, and now we got to get younger, and then they've done it. So but always a possibility for them to move around is for sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Even including your guys, the Steelers, because they moved up last year I mean,
They did.
they will move up when the mood strikes, I guess. What would entice them, do you think, to move up from 20 this year?
I mean, honestly, I think it would be offensive line again, right? It would be if they fall in love with Jackson Powers Johnson and feel like he's going to go, at 17 or 12 and want to move up, or if there's an offensive tackle again that they really like, they just cut their starter on the other side of Broderick Jones. So, who Jones replaced on the right side, and so they have no one on the left side, really. I think it'd be offensive line again would be what would entice the Steelers. Unfortunately, I don't think they're in the Justin Fields sweepstakes. I wish they were, but as a fan, but I don't think they are.
Yeah, no, I get that. I wonder if they would try, like, if the Bengals are in the offensive tackle market, which they probably are. I wonder if they would try to snipe them there at like Jacksonville's pick or maybe Seattle's pick at 16.
Indianapolis. I think it's a good, those three. Indianapolis, Seattle don't have a ton of needs. Like moving back could make sense. So,
yeah. All right. Well, the man of the hour has arrived in the back there. So let's go ahead and bring him on. He is a contributor at Pro Football Network, but more importantly, he's the creator of RAS. He is the legend himself, Kent Lee Platte. Kent, man, we appreciate you coming on.
Oh, absolutely, man. Love you guys. We're happy to be back.
All right, Kent. So first things first. Rumor has it that we almost lost this mustache, man. Yeah. Tell me how this happened.
So I'm getting over COVID, and unfortunately this time it came with just flood works out of my nose, like to the point where this was just an absolute mess. And I don't know if you can really tell, but like this is still nice and beautiful and long, but this is very short right here. I had to trim all this down. And if it had kept going, if I didn't start to recover quick, this would have been gone. I would have had to get rid of it just out of necessity. But thankfully it cleared up and we were able to get back to it. And it still looks a little weird, but it'll grow back.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm not sure we could have had you on the show tonight if you'd have been Sans mustache.
I mean, the week before the combine, can the timing get any worse for that? You know what I mean?
Like, absolutely. Yeah, literally, when your face is going to be plastered everywhere, we have it on the thumbnail for the video of the podcast to be like, if you don't have the mustache, people are like, who's this guy? Like, what did this guy do? But
I would barely recognize myself.
We're glad it's here. So, Kent, why don't you give us a quick breakdown? I have some new listeners, people coming in the draft game. Maybe they've seen RAS, maybe they haven't seen what RAS is. If you can give us kind of a breakdown of what that is and what you have kind of created and done with it over the years.
Yeah, RAS stands for Relative Athletic Scores. The R does all the heavy lifting there. The idea behind this is that it takes players' testing and it compares it to a player's position group from 1987 all the way to the player's draft year, and it gives it a 0 to 10 score. So you don't have to look at it and try to figure out whether a 4 or 5 is any good for that position. You can easily figure out that, a 7 out of 10 is pretty good. Maybe not super great, but pretty good. You don't have to try to figure it out on your own. It gives you that nice little context. I produce everything on these cards, and everything comes out color-coded in stoplight color coding, red, yellow, and green. Everybody understands that. So it's just a nice way to try to add some context to player testing data and provide a little bit of information that people really want this time of year. They want to have a good idea of where their guys are and how well their guys test, especially when the guys test really well, which a lot of these first round guys are going to.
So what I'm kind of was wondering here, like, one, I mean, we can get to the second question first, but like, why do you think this has become the most referenced basic metric from here until the draft? And follow up on that is, how does that make you feel?
I think it picked up steam a lot because of how simple it is and how easy to understand it is. I can explain the entire metric in a single tweet. Most people understand it with maybe one follow-up question, and we've gotten to the point that people just kind of get it. They understand it. Everybody kind of gets what 0 to 10 is. They get the color system. They kind of understand the overall concept behind it, and because it's so simple and so accessible, it's just very easy to pick up and kind of run with. Everything is up on my website at ras.football. You can go look up any player that you want to. All of this data is free. There's no subscription. There's no logins that you have to do. Everything is just up on the site. You want to go compare your favorite players? We have a compare page. You can go compare the guys side by side and look at how they measure up. Because of that, and because we continue to improve the tooling and try to find different ways to make it not just more accessible, but more useful for fans of the draft, it's just picked up. We used to have Spark back in the day, but if you didn't know how Spark worked, it didn't really mean anything to you. If I told you a guy had like 111.5 Spark, that doesn't really mean anything to most people because they're not going to understand the context of like, is that good? Is that a bad score? Is that a great score? I don't know. I don't know if that's any good. What is it based on? How much does any of that stuff measure or play into it? Because RAS is simple and everything is measured the same and everything is weighed the same, it's very easy to pick up and kind of run with it. And I think that's played a big role in it. I've enjoyed it. I've had a lot of fun doing RAS over the last decade. I started this back in 2013, so we're screaming past a decade. I just expanded the database. When I built it back in 2017, which is when I put the site online. It didn't actually go live until 2019, but when I built it, I put in 25,000 players, assuming that maybe eventually I would get there. We went blasting by that number, and we're not looking back. We're going to keep looking ahead and making sure that we're providing some tools and some fun information for people around the draft time.
Yeah, look, people are crazy for it. I mean, you got ESPN guys tweeting out, they can't wait for the RAS cards to come out. You got, like you said, I think it is super easy to understand. It's great. I love the comparison tool. When I do my player comps toward closer to the draft, I do prospect to prospect because that's what I know. But I always, before I submit, I'm like, let me go check the two RAS cards. Do they line up? And a lot of times they do. Sometimes they don't. And I go back to the drawing board. Like I love to have that data to kind of back me up. So we talked about why kind of people like it. Should we care? Like, does RAS correlate to, what does it correlate to that we should care about RAS that it's good? Does it correlate to draft capital? Does it correlate to NFL success? Like, what's kind of the background data that, hey, RAS is something I should pay attention to because X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I never built it out with that intention. The idea was just to make something that was accessible and easy to understand. But very quickly, I found that the players that get drafted early tend to have the highest scores. The players that find success in the NFL tend to have the higher scores. I talked about hit rates a short while ago about tight ends. I talk about tight ends a lot just because it's such an easy position to point to. But the best tight ends in the NFL over the past several decades have been the very best of athletes. The same thing's true for offensive tackles, pass rushers, corners. It doesn't mean that you ignore the guys that test poorly. And I think part of why there's some appeal to this is that we're never looking at it like this is the be all end all, right? If a guy tests poorly, you don't just write them off. You just look at it as maybe it's a concern. It's something that we might have to look further into. Sometimes there's context around it, and we can look at that and be able to put a number on it and say he tested poorly in this area, but he was dealing with a hamstring issue or something. We're able to kind of look at that and provide additional context, and we can put a number on it. It's one thing to look at a player who runs a little bit better at their 40-yard dash and at their pro day and be like, oh, yeah, he improved at his pro day versus his combine. It's another thing to look at a player who improves every single drill significantly and not just say, oh, yeah, he did better at his pro day at all of these things, but being able to say, oh, he was a 30th percentile athlete at the combine. He was dealing with an injury. He was ill. We've had issues where people have illnesses. And then they go to their pro day and they just blow it up. And you go from a 30th percentile athlete all the way up to an 80th or 90th percentile athlete. You can put that number on it and be like, look, we had some concerns. He showed that those concerns were not that big of a deal. Now we can take this and look at that whole picture and be confident in our evaluation going forward. And being able to do that kind of stuff and being able to put numbers on it and quantify it in such a way provides a value to the draft community. And casual fans also are able to pick that up and understand that very quickly. So I've always been trying to just make a helpful, useful tool, and it seems like that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to keep doing that.
It's great, and it's definitely become such a huge part of one of the tools that we use here at Draft Countdown for sure. We know the Colts are the obvious biggest believers in RAS, right? We've almost become a fun gag for us during the draft now, and I think the lowest over the last 2 years they've drafted is what, Shane, 8.5, I believe.
Yeah, Josh Downs was the lowest.
8.5. Who are some other teams that just seem to, okay, we're going to look at the RAS cards and that's where we're going?
Yeah, the Green Bay Packers have always been a big one. They've done that for several years now, where they've picked up elite testers all the time, and it's the same thing as the Colts, where it's just been a running gag. The Philadelphia Eagles are well known for having a very athletic offensive line, and they've had the most athletic offensive line for about a decade. And every time that they pick a new offensive lineman, it's gonna be one of those guys. It's gonna be one of these super elite testers. We've seen Ryan Pace of the Bears seems to be a big believer in athletic testing, and he started to pick up guys like that all over the place. We've seen it with Brad Holmes when he first came to the Detroit Lions. He started picking lots of upper tier athletes. He doesn't generally pick guys that are lower tier athletes. And when he does, he explains that reasoning. Like it's part of their process to look at the testing and be able to say, we know this guy isn't an elite tester, but here's why we still believe in this player. Here's why we still believe in our evaluation of them. And it's fun to see when that stuff gets picked up. You know, every year I talk about NFL teams have their own dedicated analytics departments. They're not using my tool specifically. If they are, that would be sweet. But I haven't heard anybody say that specifically. But some of these teams, whatever they're using is so close to it that it's basically an analog for what those teams are using. And the Colts are an obvious example of that. Whatever they're using for their analytics, for their players, it's so similar to what RAS is that it may as well be the same thing. And it's really fun when you see those trends and you see the fan bases pick up on it, because they start to look at those players, they start to find those guys, they start to key in on who they're probably looking at. And then when their teams pick them, because they are doing that type of process, they get really excited, and fans excited around draft time is one of the best things. So we love it.
So maybe this is a dumb question, like maybe it's a no-doubt answer, but I feel like I have to ask. I think it's important for people. I think people have the question there. Like, are players getting more athletic? I think that it'd be like no doubt, yeah. But you have the data. You have the database back in 1987. Like, is it clearly, hey, players are a lot more athletic today than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago? Or maybe we overinflate that. Maybe I'm wrong.
So records are made to be broken, right? Every record that ever gets made is going to be broken by somebody eventually. And NFL testing is that way. We're always going to see the best scores get beaten. When we have a guy last year in Anthony Richardson come out and beat Cam Newton's score, which he had held since he got drafted, that's really wild to see because it was held for so long. If somebody eventually beats Calvin Johnson's score, which I doubt will ever happen, Calvin's lowest test was 97th percentile. If somebody beats that, that's going to be a wild day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that overall players are getting more athletic. There is a bigger focus on the NFL Combine and NFL testing in general, and it's gotten more and more steam as years have progressed. And I think that will continue because players are wise to it. I like to point to guys like Mike Mamula, who's a famous workout warrior. That might have even been where the term came from. But you have guys like that come out and test ridiculously well. They train specifically for the drills that they're going to be doing at the NFL Combine and their pro day, and then they blow them out of the water, and it raises their draft stock, and they get picked Other players notice that. Other players notice that helped that guy get drafted higher, and then they do the same thing. Only those guys are better football players. They're actually worth those draft spots, and they're able to justify the pick in more ways than just I tested really well. They're able to do that whole picture and put more onto it. I think we're going to see that trend continue. I don't think it's necessarily that players are getting more athletic. As far as like scoring, the average RAS score increased until the year 2010, and it's decreased every year since then. It's actually gotten lower. Like the average score each year has been below 5. I don't think the reason for that is that players are suddenly less athletic. The reason for that is that we have more data now. We're collecting more data. You're only going to get, the top 300-ish players out of a draft class are going to be those really ridiculous testers. And the other 1,700 to 2,500 players are going to test, from there down to the very bottom. There's a lot of players in a draft class that never get talked about, that never get any airtime, that aren't in those mock simulators that we do. They're just guys that really want it and probably know in their heart they're probably never going to play a game of football. But they try anyway. And we collect that data anyway. It's valuable to look at guys like that and see that there's a threshold that you got to hit. But overall, I don't think guys are getting more athletic. We have guys, you go back and look at guys like Charles Woodson, Champ Bailey, and you see guys that tested just ridiculously off the charts many years ago. And you realize that there have been incredible athletes since we started the sport, and there's going to continue to be those guys. It's just they're much more notable now when we have social media, so we see more of it.
I mean, yeah, there's probably a 9-figure industry now just on combine training, and those guys all should tithe Mike Mamula every year because he's basically the guy that got this started. I had a question sent to me from a good friend of the show, Brian Lamb, over at NFL Draft Lounge. He was curious. It seems easy to find like an outside wide receiver with a high RAS and it's going to be athletic. Is there any correlation between a productive slot receiver and RAS?
I think you see that about as much as you see guys on the outside that test well. Generally, when you're looking at the different subtypes of positions, you're looking at the things that they win at and whether or not those skills translate. With wide receiver, speed is always going to be something that you're concerned with, and even guys that test really well with agility drills, if they run a 4.8, they're still not going to be a productive NFL receiver. Even if they have a really good cone time, even if they have good explosion drills, they're just not. We haven't seen it. When we have guys like that, they still generally test well for wide receivers because you have the 40-yard dash, which is actually 3 tests, the 40, and then the 2 splits, the 20 and 10. And then you have the vert and the broad, your 2 explosion drills. And it's usually an and/or for slot guys. They usually have explosion drills or agility drills. It's usually not both. Outside guys are where you see that overall profile more. But that's half the drills right there. That's 5. And then size is 2 more. Wide receivers generally skip bench, so we can pretend that doesn't exist. But you end up looking at most of the drills. So guys that tend to find success tend to be guys that test well across the board. Some sub positions you don't see that with. We talk about nose tackle every year. Nose tackles don't need to be fast. So there's 3 drills gone. Their agility drills don't really matter. So there's another 2. We're at half of the drills that don't really matter for a nose tackle. So you get nose tackles who have scores in the 2s and the 3s who are still very athletic for a nose tackle, but nose tackles don't even run 10 yards most plays. Most plays, they're in this little 5-yard box and they just kind of stay in there. So those tests don't really mean as much. And if they test poorly, we don't care because that isn't a translatable skill. It's not something that matters for what they do in a position. My favorite example to use for how a guy wins, you look at the traits that a guy wins with, was when we had DK Metcalf score horribly on his agility drills, had 20th percentile agility drills. Oh, this guy's such terror. We can't believe he had these terrible things. Go watch how he plays and tell me that matters based on his play style. DK Metcalf was never out there, making those little jittery moves at the line and running these super intricate routes and things that you see guys like Cooper Kupp and Wes Welker and Golden Tate and guys like that do. That was never his game. It was never how he won. So the fact that he tested poorly there should never have mattered to anybody unless you were going to try to make him do that. And if you were going to get fired because you're not using a player to the best of their abilities anyway. If you look at a player and he doesn't run a fast 40, but he doesn't win by being fast, that slower 40 doesn't really matter all that much, unless it's an absurdly slow 40. And then you start looking at, is he even fast enough to hit that baseline level in the NFL? But if a guy tests poorly in an area that he doesn't utilize that much, it probably doesn't matter all that much. So there is context to RAS. We're not just looking at that final score and saying, this guy's good, this guy's not good. If a guy tests well in the area that he wins at, that's usually okay. I mentioned Cooper Kupp. That's a perfect example because he didn't test all that well either, but he did test really well in the areas that he utilized the most on the football field. And it shows up every time he's on that football field. So if he wins there, let him keep winning.
Look, man, we ain't got time for nuance around here, man. We got to have hot takes. Hot takes. So what you're saying is when Tavondre Sweat gets like a 2.5 RAS, we really shouldn't care.
No. Yeah, there's times when it does matter. And I mentioned tight end earlier and like why I bring this up every year because it's fascinating to me. And I love going over this because every other position we have examples of guys that tested poorly who were still successful in the NFL. We don't have that really for tight ends. There's only been one tight end who had a below average RAS and had at least a 750-yard receiving season since in the 2000s. And that was Jordan Reed, who was injured at the time that he did his pre-draft stuff. He only just barely qualified for the score. And I'm very confident that had he been fully healthy and tested, he would have had a much higher score. But he's the only guy who got to that 750-yard season since then. We haven't had anybody else. I don't have an example that I can point to. I don't have an Antonio Brown or an Anquan Bolden. Receivers are easy because you can see it on the field. I have examples for other positions, but with tight end, we don't have that. So if a guy tests poorly at tight end, it's a much more significant issue, or should be anyway, from a scouting perspective, because you can't point to a player in the NFL and be like, well, this guy still won, and here's how he did it, right? Here's the stuff that he did to overcome that and still find success in the NFL. If you can't point to an example like that, it's much harder to make a player's case. And it's going to be a concern in a war room because they're going to do the same thing. They're going to look at players and use their own comparisons and say, this is our guy. This is how we can use him. But if you don't have an example to point to, it's really hard to make that case.
Well, let's fast forward to this upcoming combine. I just want to know some players that you're excited to see. Maybe it's RAS perspective. Maybe it's for your Detroit Lions. Sorry for the way the season ended for you guys, and for giving you some crap on Twitter. But yeah, I want to know who you're looking forward to seeing out there.
Oh, there's a lot of really good guys. I usually have guys that I don't expect to test well that I still want to see test and I'm still hot for. I don't really have very many of those guys this year. But it's going to be great to watch Marvin Harrison go out there and really light everything up. We're expecting him to test really well. One of the guys I'm looking forward to, both for my Lions and just in general, is Darius Robinson. Out of Missouri. He's been one of the biggest risers in the last month leading up to the combine. He's kind of hitting that sweet spot where if he has a good combine, you're going to start seeing people talking in that first and second round. I'm excited to watch Luke McCaffrey go out there and test because he comes from a super athletic family. So I expect to see that trend continue. Abosa comes out and tests. They're going to have a great test, same thing that I expect with him. One guy that I'm excited to watch is Spencer Rattler. I'm not a super big fan of his play on the football field. But he has a really nice opportunity to come into the combine and kind of throw his name back into that day 2 consideration and try to get his profile up there. Because he has a reputation as kind of a mid guy. You know, he doesn't have the greatest arm, but he's definitely got an NFL arm. He's not super athletic, but he should be athletic enough. If he comes to the combine and tests really well, he's got an opportunity to get his name back in that day 2 consideration and push himself up some boards. Colin King is a guy that I want to see because he's had kind of a rough couple of months leading up to the combine. And if he struggles, it's going to really hurt him. But if he does well, I think that he could bounce back quite a bit and start getting his name back up in some consideration for a higher draft pick. Another guy would be Xavier Leggett. I've heard some rumors that he might not test size-wise as he's listed. I think he's listed at 6'3", 225. And I've heard that he might not test anywhere near that.
He already measured at 6'1" at the Senior Bowl. So.
Yes, which is where that stuff started, is whether or not, because the Senior Bowl is great and they do the same, basically the same test, but you can fudge that stuff a little bit. And sometimes guys just they get a bad test sometimes. Sometimes your finger slips slightly and they just take that, you know, and it's not negligence or anything. It just happens. And if he comes in and tests a little bit bigger, maybe he's able to kind of put some of those concerns to rest. And if he tests well, that's going to go a long way to doing that as well. So I'm excited to watch a lot of these receivers. It's not a great class once you get past the top couple, but I feel like it's strong enough from an athletic standpoint that you're still going to get a couple of guys that are going to have nice long NFL careers. I wish we had more tight ends. We had such a great class last year. We were so spoiled. And I knew this was going to happen because you have a great class and then you come in, you got that hangover. And you're seeing it with the discourse with Brock Bowers about him being a generational player and saying, like, look, we can only call so many people generational, you know. But if he had come out last year, he would have been the top tight end in that class. And that was a ridiculous class. It's going to be really fun to see him come out and do that too. So very much looking forward to it. And as every year, I'm really hopeful that the top players, especially at quarterback, but also at pass rusher and a lot of the corners, guys that just skip the testing because they don't really need it. You know, I would love to see Caleb Williams test. I would love to see Drake May test. I don't expect to see either of them test. It would be great if we did. But maybe they'll prove me wrong. We're going to switch that trend back around and get guys tested again. That would make me ecstatic. But I don't have a logical reason that they should. It's because I want them to is never going to be a good enough reason, as much as I would love for it to be one.
There may or may not be a bet on this show about where Spencer Rattler gets drafted. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, he's had such a weird career, man, because when he was
it's an understatement for sure.
When he was at the top of his game, he was very well up there, and then it just completely shattered and fell apart. And then he started to build it back up, and then it fell back down again. And you know, those ups and downs can kick you. But Brock Purdy had some of that too. I mean, Brock Purdy was a very inconsistent player in college. He wasn't some, you know, hidden talent that nobody noticed. We all watched him. We all saw him play. We all knew the kind of guy that he was. He just fixed the right things when he got to the NFL. And sometimes that's all you need to do.
All right. Last question, and we'll let you get out of here. Shane asked you for the guys you're looking forward to. And normally we'll ask you who is in contention for that 10 RAS. I'm not going to do that.
Gosh.
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask you, who is going to have the lowest RAS of the people that test at the combine?
Oh, man.
Who is finishing dead last?
Yeah, that might be harder than
that is a much harder question. That's a much harder question. There was a really big offensive tackle. I think it was the guy from Houston that is probably going to be that's going to be, because huge tackles generally don't test well. And generally they don't really need to all that much because they go to offenses that don't use them because they're super athletic. but that's probably who I would guess. I apologize for not remembering his name off that. I'm pretty sure it was
Patrick Paul.
Yes, that would be the one. Yeah, that would be the one. He might be that guy, I think. Although when you're that big, size does help you quite a bit when you're scoring. Not enough. I mean, Orlando Brown's one of the biggest players in the NFL, and his score was very, very low.
I mean, that's one of the all-time worst workouts, right?
It was. I still remember that during the broadcast, they talked about how he was getting admonished for loafing, which I always remember that because you don't use the word loafing very often. But he was just kind of sitting around and got in trouble for it when he was at the combine, and I always find that hilarious in hindsight.
All right, Kent. Well, man, we can't thank you enough for coming on. This is, I think, the third year in a row we've had you on this time of the year, and we love RAS. We love the product that you put out there, and I can't wait. I can't wait to see all these cards come out during the combine. But then the flip side of that is, man, I feel bad for you because that is that's a lot of work, man, over that 4-day span.
I'm actually going to be at the combine a couple of days this year. I'm meeting up with some people for some work stuff for RAS business. But I'm going to try to be down there and somehow still do all of my other stuff because I am a lunatic at heart. So I hope to see some people down there. And if you're going on, I think I'm doing Thursday and Friday. So if you are listening and you happen to be down there, I'm easy to find. And I will have the hat too. It's around here somewhere. I'm if you can't tell, I'm doing some work, but I will be wearing the hat as well. It'll be the mustache and the bowler, just like normal. So look for me, find me, talk football. I'm always ready to talk football.
Maybe one of the NFL teams will find you. Get a scout that's like, "Hey, man, like we use RAS, I love it," and you'll be like, "Oh yeah." I bet there's a couple. I bet there's a couple that look at it. It can't hurt to have another data point.
I mean, you've got the All-Star games behind you now.
Yep.
So, I mean, Jim Nagy talks about RAS all the time. Galco at the Shrine talks about it all the time. You got those guys hooked in. The NFL can't be far behind as well. But for the 5 people that might be listening to this that don't know how to follow you already, tell them how they can find all this stuff next week.
Yeah, my website is ras.football. You can go on there and look up any of the players from 1987 to today. Again, there's over 25,000 players now. You can find me on Twitter at MathBomb. I'm actually going to be posting on Threads. I think I'm on there as MathBomb Raz right now. Somebody beat me to MathBomb on Threads. I'm also going to be posting on Facebook, also MathBomb there this year. So I'm on multiple platforms this year. I'm actually also going to be doing some TikToks. I have no videos posted, so don't expect them to be up right now. But I'm going to be doing some educational content around NFL testing and around how some of that stuff works and all that. Very excited to try to put some of that stuff together. You can find me any of those places and feel free to hit me up. I know I get kind of internet famous around this time of year, but it's all football and everybody loves talking football, me especially. So don't feel intimidated by me. It's weird when I get people saying that they are, but feel free to ask me about stuff. I love talking about football in the draft.
Again, man, we appreciate you coming on, and we'll bring you back on this time next year.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
See you, Kent.
That was Kent Lee Platte at MathBomb on the Twitter. He's the best, man. And
always phenomenal. Always phenomenal. Yeah, he's great.
That I mean, it's revolutionary. I mean, to be honest, how you follow it, how you consume the draft. And the thing
combine. I mean, like, I mean, it's just a perfect system for is a 4.55, fast. I think for most people, they don't know, and boom, you can look at that card. You know exactly what drills the guy did well in, what drills he didn't. Man, I mean, it's just such a good, clean system, like you talked about. I would be surprised. I would be surprised if there aren't multiple NFL teams that pull up those RAS. We're going to see one of those, videos from the draft room one day and just see a RAS card on someone's screen at some point.
For sure, it's going to happen. We're definitely going to see it. I can't wait for it. And RIP his mentions when it does. That's for sure. Geez, hope he charged his phone that day because it'll be blowing up. Last thing I wanted to talk tonight, Shane, is nothing to do with the combine or RAS, but Andy Staples from On3 tweeted something out the other day, caught my attention, and I think we need to talk about it for just a few minutes. It's a lot of your college football fans think that spending is out of control or whatever on NIL and all that, and maybe they're right. But Shannon Terry, someone else at On3, tweeted that the projected spend for roster management for collectives and schools over the next 12 months for Power 5 only, that's the top 65 schools at the FBS level, is around $325 million. Quote unquote roster value remains around 90% of the total NIL market and valuation for college football players. To which Andy Staples followed up on that, saying, to put this in perspective, each NFL team, as in one NFL team, spent $224.8 million on salary in 2023. That $325 million total was for 65 schools. Just to put that in comparison between NIL and the NFL.
Yeah, like we are not to NFL levels. And honestly, I think a lot of the numbers that get reported for NIL, there's no proof. Like none of these have, here's the contract we can show you. Here's the, here's the kid saying it. Here's the, so a lot of them I'm very skeptical of. Like, I don't think this kid's getting $3-4 million. Like, I don't think that's true. Even when those rumors happen. And, you put out those numbers, and that's despite recruiting being a thing, right? Like, where in today's college football market, you have to be able to organize NIL to recruit effectively. And they're still not even coming close to NFL numbers. So, you can have your own opinion about it, but I think it's great because we have seen how many talented college football players not make it in the NFL or get hurt and not get drafted and not have a career. And it's like, man, the education's awesome and has been great, but now you have something that you can fall back on. With the amount of money that's being made for the schools, for the teams, like that's a drop in the bucket. There's some schools that could spend $300 million and be fine and still be making money. So.
Yeah, and the schools, by the way, are about to agree to another large chunk of change from Disney for the TV rights for the expanded college football playoffs. So
yeah, and a lot of the money is not coming from the schools, right? It's it has to be coming from elsewhere, from outside. That's the choice of those people too. So
I do find it silly. Some of these collectives are basically begging for donations from fans. That much I find a bit silly. But hey, man, if you got disposable income and you think your $25 a month is going to help you get your running back to state you do you, buddy. I've blown money on worse stuff than that. I can tell you that.
Have. We all have. And if you're a billionaire and this is your hobby, then go ahead and
tax write-off, baby. Tax write-off.
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't care about the NIL stuff. Really at all. The portal now, I worry about that one a little bit, but I think that's something that maybe needs to be controlled a little bit better than what it is right now.
Yeah,
but
look, I say I don't disagree. I mean, it makes our jobs really hard. It makes my job really hard. But how many weeks in a row, and we could have done it again this week, could we talk about the college coaching carousel? So that's under control, then,
Right. Hey. I'm with you. I know, I agree. And that's the flip side of it is, who was it? Was it the Ryan Grubb situation? That to me was completely disingenuous by the school, because once you change head coaches, a 30-day window opens up for players to enter the portal. They knew 2 weeks ahead before that 30-day window was up that Ryan Grubb was taking the Seahawks offensive coordinator job. And they didn't say anything.
No.
And then as soon as the window closed, Ryan Grubb's the new offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. Sorry, everybody.
Whoops.
So, yeah, that stuff is completely disingenuous. But I'm with you. Let's change some rules on that as well as much as, and then with the transfer rules as well. But I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, we could talk about college football stuff all day. It's not the season for it right now, but that they're talking about expanding the playoff again to 14 or 16. Basically auto bidding the Big Ten and SEC to 4 teams apiece. It's a mess.
like I'm kind of all for that too. Just give me more film on more players. Like I
right. And like I said, for us,
it'd be great.
But as a fan of college football, I'm not a fan anymore.
Yeah. Do we need that?
I know. I mean, I literally, I used to get like upset with the ebbs and flows of South Carolina football, which meant I was upset a lot. But I don't anymore because it's utterly meaningless at this point for me too. Now the Bengals, on the other hand, I still get upset about that, but South Carolina football does not really affect my mood anymore.
Right. Well, good for you. Good for you, Brian. It's good.
I'm trying. All right. We didn't have any questions in the chat or on Twitter tonight, but we did have one earlier in the Discord. I don't necessarily know if it was intended to come out here, but I said that I would answer it on the pod tonight because it's related to a South Carolina player. So I feel like I have a little insight here. So it's like, this one's actually, I can answer. Sam asks us, when will Nick Gargiulo be added to the big boards, and how high do you think his ceiling is? For me personally, I think he is a fringe draftable player. I would say at best 7th round player, as a guy who can back up both guard positions. As a center, negatory. That goose ain't laying. I'm gonna tell you that, because he played center this year for South Carolina for like half the games. Some of the worst snaps I've ever seen in my life came from that man. Center ain't it. Guard, I think he's fine. Jeff Risen, we kind of chatted back and forth about it on Twitter today. He's of the same mindset where he thinks he's a fringe draftable guy, 7th round priority free agent type. He's an older prospect, so I don't think his ceiling's that high. I think his ceiling is as a backup guard.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit higher on him than you are. Not too much. Not I'm like, oh, he's a day 2 pick or anything. But I think the leadership, I think the intangible piece maybe gets him drafted around higher. You talked about the flexibility for the guard spots. I think it might test decently well. He's not going to be a 9 RAS guy.
I mean, he did get a combine invite, so there is that, because he's got that going for him.
Right. And I think his Yale tape is really, really good. And like South Carolina, not as much. And so I think you could take that for what it's worth.
I mean, that whole offensive line was awful.
Right. I think it was tough to be good there.
And the thing is, and that's something that I think is positively, I believe, working in Spencer Rattler's benefit, is the teams got to see, hey, this man was under duress a lot. Look at the throws he made. Especially the one throw in the Florida game, I think is getting a lot of people's attention, where basically off his back foot, he threw it a 55-yard rope down the field to Leggett. So, yeah, I mean, but Nick Gargiulo, I think at best, probably 7th round pick, in my opinion. Hope that answered your question there, Sam. Final thoughts tonight, Shane. You got a 7-rounder coming up again on Monday. That's correct?
Yeah, 7-rounder Monday.
Yep, and you had your combine 40 predictions went up today. Now, I should note this. We know not all of these players are going to run 40s because some of them are hurt, like Jonathan Brooks from Texas. But it's just kind of what you feel based off tape and prior knowledge of testing from like Nike camps and stuff like that, right? That you're kind of projecting 40 times for everybody that's at the combine.
Right. Just flat across the board. I like to do this because, when a guy runs a 40, we see Twitter blow up. He ran a 4.42 like it was awesome. And then I go and look at my prediction. I'm like, I thought he was going to run the 4.3s, right? So, it tells you don't want to double count guys that are fast. If I think he's already fast in my prediction and he's fast, then I already accounted for that. And that's why I like to do it. If guys are radically faster or slower than what I thought they would be, that's when it changes my ranking. So it helps me really hone in my rankings how they should change based on what I thought the guy would run and how he would be.
I think a good example of this was it last year with Kyron Williams?
Yeah, 2 years ago, yeah.
2 years ago, where he tested super poorly. So you're like, okay, I got to go back, and you drop him down the rankings a little bit, and it ends up, maybe he was all right after all, because he's had some good success, thus far in the NFL, right?
Well, it tells you to go back to the tape too. Like, go back and watch him again and say, okay, maybe I don't think this testing's right. It doesn't matter. I think that helps me to who should I go back to, who was wildly different than I expected there. And Kyron Williams was one of those. I mean, he dropped down all of our rankings. I think we still had him higher than he got drafted, though.
Yeah. So Jake Bobo last year, but that was kind of a weird deal.
Yeah.
With the monsoon track.
I had a little UDFA success with the Seahawks this year. So,
yeah. All right. So that's going to do it for tonight's edition of the Draft Countdown podcast. As always, like I said earlier, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you get notified when we go live each and every week. If you're listening to this on an audio platform, be it Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, leave us a 5-star review, share it out with everyone. Follow me on Twitter at Deep Fried Draft. Follow Shane on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam. Follow Draft Countdown on Twitter at Draft Countdown, and go to draftcountdown.com for all of your daily draft needs. For Shane, I'm Brian. Good night, everybody.